you miss me? I've been out of a comatose, but the depression.
Hello, and welcome to Controlled Burns, the weekly hobby list podcast from SlowBurne from Wildfire Gaming. A couple of weeks ago, I walked through the games that I played in 2024, and now I'd like to do the same thing with all of the other media that I've consumed in 2024, namely with music, movies, and books. Music is definitely going to take the lion's share of the discussion as I have listened to dozens of albums this year, including more than 2 dozen from 2024 specifically. So that will give us plenty of room to work with and enough to allow me to select my top songs and albums from the year specifically, which I was unable to do for the game since I didn't play enough or really finish enough games that came out in 2024. Finally, I also watched a handful of movies and read a few books, so I'll discuss those as well and perhaps allude to some future episodes of the podcast based on those experiences. As a side note, I've also definitely watched some TV this year alongside my wife Reagan, but I've never recorded that anywhere near as closely as these other things, so I'm making a point to make more of a note of that in 2025, and that's something that we can discuss at the end of this year. Before we go any further, I'd just like to remind you that Controlled Burns is a weekly hobby list podcast with a particular focus on lists and topics related to video games, music, TV, and film, as well as other hobbies and aspects of pop culture. If you're interested in writing into the podcast and having your comments or questions read on air, you can write into the podcast at ControlledBurnes with an ES at gmail.com. So to kick things off, let's talk about the albums I listened to in 2024 and rank them. In total, I listened to 43 albums in 2024, which is definitely not the most I've ever listened to in a year, but it does mark a sharp increase over what I have done the last couple of years. And I might actually be undercounting that. Is it actually 43? Because there were a few that I listened to just as the year was wrapping up. So yeah, it's actually 44 total here as I look at my list. So yeah, like I said, not the most that I've ever listened to in a year, but a significant increase over what I have been doing. Um, but what's interesting about that is that I didn't actually start listening to albums this year until as late as mid-September when I was on a road trip with Reagan's side of the family. The climax of the trip was a concert at Colorado's Red Rocks Amphitheater, which I think is near Morrison, Colorado, for those that know the area. So it was music focused trip anyway, but being on the road definitely provides plenty of time to listen to music. But on this road trip, unlike the last one I took with the family 3 years ago, I decided I was going to mainly focus on playing Pokemon X, which I haven't played all the way through since it came out. We talked a little bit about that in the last episode, talking about the games that I started this year. While I did put some solid time into that title, I do think this trip, combined with another development that had taken place either slightly before or after when I took a business trip to Indiana, sort of re-sparked an interest in music that definitely took hold during the latter third of the year. But it was on this trip that I listened to my first album of the year, which was Crash from 1996 by the Dave Matthews Band. And that was on September 12th. I'm not the biggest fan of Dave Matthews Band, and in fact, all of what I've heard from them has come from Reagan, who suggested we listen to this album on the car ride. Previously, she showed me Before These Crowded Streets, the 1998 follow-up to Crash, which was only separated by, coincidentally, a live album that was recorded at Red Rocks in 1997. So I thought that was interesting. Well, I really liked some of the standouts from Before These Crowded Streets, like Halloween and Don't Drink the Water and Last Stop, all of which I still listen to pretty heavily today. I'm sorry to say nothing really stuck out to me about Crash other than how poor some of the middling tracks like Let You Down and Drive In, Drive Out were. I wrote a review of this album on the Soundtrack Online, so check it out there if you're interested in more of my thoughts on it. But on the whole, I found it to be pretty dull. And the second album I listened to this year was Stress Dreams from 2022 by Green Sky Bluegrass on September 15th. During the trip, the act that Reagan's family was really interested in seeing was Andy Frasco and the UN, which is a band that is great live, but pretty uninspired in the studio. But frankly, I think they might be the band with the greatest gap between the two I've ever heard, where they're very heavily on the live side versus the studio side. To be honest, I'm pretty burned out on Frasco just because they're so into him, but I did enjoy his set. But the closer of the show was actually a band I had never heard of, which was Green Sky Bluegrass. While the rest of Reagan's family bailed almost immediately to go sit in the car, which blows my mind considering they had bought the tickets. Reagan and I stayed for as long as we could until they basically forced us to leave, and that was a long set. I was really impressed by the musicality of this group, most particularly with the pianist Holly Bowling, who I later realized is not actually a full member of the group, but she does tour with them. I don't think she actually appears on Dreams, or if she does, then very in a very minor role, which is the 2022 album I decided to check out coming out of the show. The music does suffer without her, but there's definitely some standouts here, particularly "Worry for You." I heard them play that song at the show, and that's what caused me to choose this album. The title track, which is an 8-minute rumination on the subject matter, is also pretty strong. This is another album I wrote about on the soundtrack online, so check that out if you're interested in more of my thoughts. The third album I listened to this year was the Tortured Poets Department from 2024. So the first 2024 album I listened to by Taylor Swift. That was on September 24th. So anyone who knows me knows I have been a Swiftie since before that was a thing. Going back to her first album, which was massive in the small country town that I grew up in. In fact, I often wonder if many of Swift's fans today really have a grasp of where she came from. Check out the twang of her first single, Our Song, if you want an idea of what she sounded like as a 16-year-old. However, I wondered if my fandom would become lapsed after Midnights, which was her album before the Torture Poets Department. That was a widely celebrated and popular album, but I thought that was easily her worst effort ever. It was filled with songs that sounded kind of thrown together to make something commercial. And so I was pretty down on her after that album, and I never actually made it all the way through it. But because of that, I was pleasantly surprised by the Tortured Poets Department, which I found to be an excellent comeback. There's still some of the low effort chaff in this album, like Florida is a really good example, or I Can Fix Him. But the majority of the songs here is really quite strong, which is particularly impressive considering I listened to the double LP version, which doubled its length, and it's pretty long, just the regular album anyway. So this is a lot of music. Let me pull it up here actually, because I'm curious exactly how many. Yeah, so I listened to the Torture Poets Department, the anthology. So just the oh well, it doesn't actually split it up by disc, which I guess makes sense, and given that discs are kind of passe these days. But it's 31 songs, the anthology version. Just over 2 hours of music. So this is no small collection of work here. And I find that most artists typically struggle whenever they're trying to put out that much music at one time. But Taylor Swift is not most artists, and she delivered some of her best work across these discs, including the title track, which may be my new favorite Taylor Swift song, as well as Down Bad and So High School. Both of those were standouts for me. I challenge anybody to listen to the title track in particular, though, and report back that Swift is nothing but an overhyped pop star, because that is a really, really great song. Moving on to number four, I listened to Darkness on the Edge of Town, the 1978 album from Bruce Springsteen on September 28th. This is the first album I had heard going into this year, but it has now jumped up to my top album of all time, which is a title that, really Springsteen is just competing with himself for between his 70s output of The Wild Innocent and E Street Shuffle, Born to Run, and this, all of which I've named the best album ever at various points in my life. But while Born to Run, as titanic as it is, still has skippable tracks like Night and Meeting Across the River, Darkness really doesn't. And it still hits the peaks, maybe even higher than Born to Run does. Maybe with the exception of Backstreets, that's certainly a contender for his greatest work ever. But Darkness on the Edge of Town has Racing in the Street, which is, I think, my current pick for best song ever. Although there is a live version I like more than the studio version. It's hard for me to fathom how anyone could listen to this album without getting something out of it. Springsteen is the master of combining breathtakingly beautiful and powerful music, combined with the best lyricism I've ever heard, and this album does both better than any other that I know. So the fifth album I listened to this year was, this title, Greatest Hits, just kidding, live, no hits. A 2024 album from John Craigie. I listened to this album on October 2nd. I think perhaps the first thing I knew about Reagan's family is that they love John Craigie. For those that are unfamiliar, he's a self-deprecating singer-songwriter who has quietly built up a cult following, as well as a pretty impressive catalog of songs. Last I checked on Spotify, he had about 400,000 monthly listener. So if I pull him up here, let's take a look. He is up to well, he's now down to 339,000. So it does kind of fluctuate. He was a little bit on a high because I think he shot up whenever the new album came out. But yeah, he kind of goes back and forth between the 300,000 and peaks around 400,000. I myself would probably count Craigie among my favorites as well, certainly of the modern age. And he's at his best live through albums like this one. Um, Mallory is a heartfelt song that I actually heard first live myself at one of the many shows that I've been dragged to over the last 3 years, before it was put on this album. I think that's the best song here, but the closer, which is kind of a combination, still exists slash baseball story, mixes his signature storytelling with music in a single track, and that's also a standout. But moving on to number six, I listened to Always, their self-titled debut from 2014, also on October 2nd. 2024 was the 10-year anniversary of Always' self-titled debut, which is wild to me considering I remember listening to it with my brother for the first time during its release year, thanks to a positive review in Rolling Stone, just like it was yesterday. What's amazing is how well this album still holds up today. It's consistently sunny music, hiding underlying depression dichotomy still works, and it is right up there with Darkness on the Edge of Time as Town as perhaps the only other album that appears in its entirety in my favorites playlist on Spotify, which is under 1,000 songs. I think there's 800 something songs in that playlist right now. There's no highlights for this album because they're all a highlight, really. It's just very consistent quality. But number seven, I listened to A Stroll Through Johto, a 2024 album from TPR. Listened to it on October 8th. I'll never forget listening to TPR for the first time in 2017 and hearing his renditions of Nobuo Uematsu's work from Final Fantasy VII and just being blown away. Since then, he has been a fixture for me, particularly in my instrumental playlist that I shovel through at work, which has consistently put him in my top five artists on Spotify for the better part of a decade at this point. You combine his penchant for arranging video game music with perhaps the most nostalgic music that exists for me in the Pokemon Gold and Silver soundtrack, and you have a recipe for great success. Amazingly, though, it's his arrangement of a song that didn't appear in the original version of the game, Global Terminal, that stands out to me as the best. It sounds very similar to something Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor might have dreamed up for a Pixar soul. Moving on to number eight, we have Is This the Life We Really Want? The 2017 album from Roger Waters. Listen to this on October 24th. Before I really fell in love with Springsteen, which happened around the time period this album released, there was a time when I would have put Is This the Life We Really Want at the top of my list for the best album ever. And even post Springsteen, it's a strong contender, and it's no less relevant today than it was in 2017 as a strong rebuke to the election of Donald Trump. I like this better than anything I've ever heard from Pink Floyd. I think this is just Roger Waters' best work. So give it a listen if you're a fan of his music or interested in something a little bit different. Number nine, though, was To the Moon's original game soundtrack by Can Gao, which came out, I guess, whenever 2011, which is when that game came out. But I listened to it on November 7th. As those of you who listen to my top 25 video game episode will know, I consider To the Moon to be one of the greatest video games of all time. Well, ditto for its soundtrack, which, like the game, was largely composed by the same man, Ken Argao, who may just be one of the most talented individuals I've ever heard of, considering that he put together that story and this music for the same project. That's incredible. A lot of the music is kind of reused, the use of leitmotif in this work. That is a caveat. But when you put together a title track as good as Gao did for To the Moon, coupled with the incredible music that makes up the closing medley, I think you've earned it. There's a lot of really great stuff here. Well, I would probably consider this my favorite video game soundtrack. But a big contender for that was the 10th album I listened to this year, which was Octopath Traveler 2's original soundtrack, which came out last year, by Yasunori Nishiki. I listened to that on November 12th. Octopath Traveler 2 was really the only other soundtrack I considered a rival to the Moon's Throne as the best ever. So I decided to give it a listen as well to directly compare. Unlike To the Moon's brisk runtime, Octopath Traveler's 2 soundtrack is itself longer than probably 2 full playthroughs of the entire game of To the Moon. That Yasunori Nishiki was able to deliver such consistent quality across that runtime is nothing short of astounding. No other video game soundtrack I've listened to in its entirety reaches this runtime, more than 7 hours. and yet almost none of them are as good. Nishiki's penchant for taking a simple environmental piece and making it memorable and resilient enough to withstand countless repeated listens is just incredible, and it puts him right up there with among the greatest composers I've ever heard. Okay, number 11 here is Joker Foley Adieu, music from the motion picture 2024 release from Joaquin Phoenix and Lady Gaga. I listened to this on November 15th. As we will hear a little bit later when I discuss the movies I watched in 2024, I did not come away anywhere near as negative on the Joker sequel as many others did. Though, kind of like with The Last of Us Part 2, I can understand the aversion of the general public. We'll get into that later. But the soundtrack itself, central to the strength of the film, is it's rock solid. It's particularly with the standout cover of the Bee Gees' underrated gem "To Love Somebody," which perfectly walks the line between silly and heartfelt. I listened to that so many times this year. I love that stuff. Okay, number 12 now is Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band Road Diary, which I listened to on November 19th. This is a 2024 release. This turned out to be an incredible year for my fandom of Bruce Springsteen, which only grew thanks to his release of no less than 7 full-length live albums, which I'm still working my way through as I was putting together this podcast. What makes Road Diary special is it's an album I essentially heard live myself, as it is taken from recordings of his 2023 world tour, which I caught whenever he was in Dallas with Reagan's family. Obviously, it was an incredible experience to hear my favorite artist live and in person, but I think Road Diary holds up as a testament to how unbelievably strong Springsteen and the E Street Band are as performers. I don't think there's any question that they were the greatest live act in the world at their peak in the 1980s, and I'm not so sure that they don't still have that title today. But number 13 is Agori Mori May, another 2024 album from the Smashing Pumpkins, which I listened to on November 22nd. I got into Smashing Pumpkins right around the time I moved to New Jersey for a brief stint at the end of 2019, thanks in no small part to the inclusion of 1979 in Grand Theft Auto 4, which I was playing for the first time that year. Prior to Agori Mori May, I had listened to the main highlights of their work, Siamese Twins and Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. But I was surprised at how well this new music holds up to those classics. The album definitely has a steep drop off of the final two tracks, which should have been cut entirely. But I would put Who Goes There, Eden, and War Dreams of Itself up there with their best work. Okay, number 14 was Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band Live, 1975 through 85. This came out in 1986, and I listened to it on November 22nd. This is the massive live album that was released at the height of Springsteen's post Born in the USA fame in 1985, and it still remains a testament to the power of his live act during that period. I would say almost all of his best music appears here, but for an artist with the body of work that Springsteen does, it's impossible for even a triple LP to capture all of it. So I'll just say that this entire thing, despite its length, is filled with greatness from top to bottom. Number 15 was What Do We Know Now? 2024 album from Jay Mascis. I listened to this on November 22nd as well. Mascis is one of those rare artists that I have managed to really keep up with since his solo release of Several Shades of Why back in 2011. What's amazing is how I actually listened to that album way back then and that I have kept up with him all this time. What do we do now is certainly more energetic than much of his past solo work, but to overall strong results, like with the title track, you can't or you don't understand me, and I can't find you. Mascot's gravelly voice probably wouldn't appeal to everyone, but his guitar work is unimpeachable, and for those who can kind of jive with his vocals, he is a true hidden gem that I highly recommend you check out. Number 16 was Clancy, the 2024 album from 21 Pilots, which I listened to on November 24th. This was an interesting listen, as I've never been a fan of this band, unlike my cousin Brett, who has joined the podcast previously. He considered them the best band ever at one point in his life. But I caught their live show in Dallas earlier this year with Reagan's family, and it's impressed enough to give this a listen. It's definitely an album that sounds better live, but the standout navigating, which is my favorite song of the entire live set, works regardless of the setting. I've also got to give it up to the band for that is willing to play their entire new album on the tour designed to support it. I thought that was pretty cool, pretty ballsy move by them. So number 17 was Pagan Church, another 2024 album from John Craigie. This one in partnership with TK and the Holy Know Nothings, which I listened to on November 24th. Craigie's other 2024 recording is not live. It was recorded with this other band and is much less entertaining than the other one. There's nothing here I would really call essential outside of the surprisingly strong Where It's From. But even that doesn't reach anywhere near Craigie's best work. Number 18 was Folklore, the 2020 album from Taylor Swift. I listened to this on November 27th. Reagan has consistently called Swift's Folklore slash Evermore stage as her best, which I was surprised by considering how quickly I skipped over it at the time of their release during the throes of the pandemic. We gave this a listen in the car during our Thanksgiving travels, and by the end, she definitely stood corrected. That said, there is some great stuff here, particularly Cardigan and Mirrorball, and the collaboration with Bonnie Bear and Exile. All of them I would put among her best work. I still need to give Evermore a listen to see how it compares. I think that's Evermore might be, and I guess I don't know if I've ever actually listened to 1989 all the way through, but I've pretty much listened to 1989. Obviously, I know all the highlights. Um, and Midnights I did not listen to all the way through because I didn't like it. But I'm sorry, Evermore is the only one that I've really never listened to at all. I think of her album, so I definitely need to give that a listen. But number 19 was G and X, the 2024 album from Kendrick Lamar, which I listened to on November 30th. In terms of cultural impact, it's hard to say that any artist had as big a year as Kendrick Lamar did. Sadly, I fall a bit outside that, as I think his year peaked with the fantastic Euphoria, which was one of the diss tracks that he wrote against Drake. It might have been the first major one that he put out. But it was all kind of downhill for me after that. And that I am including Not Like Us in that, which I think is kind of fine at best. While GNX is very solid, it's obviously nowhere near the masterwork that To Pimp a Butterfly was, and I wouldn't even say that it even matches Damn. I'd say it might edge out Mr. Morale, but for an artist to have fallen as far as Kendrick has since his creative peak 10 years ago, I don't know if that's really something to celebrate. But number 20 was Heart of a Dog, the 2015 album from Laurie Anderson, which I listened to on November 30th. Definitely the most unique of the albums I listened to this year. Heart of a Dog is actually a spoken word album from the mind of Lou Reed's widow, Laurie Anderson. I listened to it for the first time closer to its release and was surprised by how much it connected with me back then. It wasn't as big of a hit this time, and it's definitely not for everybody, but if you can buy into her brand of storytelling, it certainly makes for an intriguing listen. Apparently, there's a movie that is supposed to accompany it, which I've never seen, and like Robert Christgau, who recommended the album in the first place, I fear it would struggle to hold up to the pure audio version. But moving on to number 21, which was Moon Music, the 2024 album from Coldplay. I also listened to this on November 30th. During this year, I was shocked to find Coldplay consistently ranked in the top 10 most listened to artists on Spotify. They have been there every time that I have checked over the last several months. I kind of viewed them as a group I listened to 20 years ago, and so I was surprised to see them duking it out with the likes of Taylor Swift for monthly listeners and outstripping giants like Kendrick and Drake. But after listening to the double LP version of Moon Music, I have to say that I do kind of get it. This is a shockingly strong work that mixes commercial viability with surprisingly strong theming and musicianship, to the point where I found it oddly inspiring. It's probably the most widely appealing album that I listened to this year. While the bonus disc, which is mostly made up of alternate versions of the main track list, is skippable for most, don't miss out on The Karate Kid or Man in the Moon, both of which are wholly original and among the best parts of this package. But number 22 was Orgy of the Damned, the 2024 album from Slash, which I listened to on December 4th. Outside of the E Street band, Guns N' Roses definitely remains my favorite rock band of all time, and Slash's contributions to that group's success are obviously indelible. It was a critical piece of the musical development of both me and my brother, the latter of which he and Slash himself inspired to become a great guitarist in his own right. But unfortunately, much of his solo material has failed to connect with me in that same way. And while Orgy of the Damned is a consistently strong collection of blues covers, there's nothing here I really ever need to listen again. Number 23 was JPEG Raw, the 2024 album from Gary Clark Jr., which I listened to on December 5th. I was there on day one when Gary Clark Jr. released the Bright Lights EP back in 2011. I thought he was kind of the second coming of Jimi Hendrix, and in many ways he is. You should check out his live album from 2014 if you want an example of how good this guy is on a six string. Conversely, JPEG Raw is a surprisingly, and I would argue disappointingly, a guitar bear collection that kind of fails to stand out in any way. But at least the interlude to the end of the earth made for a nice inclusion on the playlist I just made for my wife for Christmas and our 1 year anniversary. So I guess I can thank Gary Clark for that one. Number 24 was Only God Was Above Us, the 2024 album from Vampire Weekend, which I listened to on December 6th. I don't think Vampire Weekend has ever connected with me to the level that they have for their die-hard fans and some critics, but at the same time, I always find their work highly listenable, and I've never heard a Vampire Weekend album that didn't have at least one standout. Here it's the album's closer, Hope, an 8-minute piano-led epic with a strong message of letting go rather than holding on to grudges for those who have wronged us. But number 25 was the Joshua Tree, the 1987 album from U2, which I listened to on December 6th as well. What is there to say about the Joshua Tree? Really, this is obviously one of the greatest albums ever, particularly that first half from basically everything from Where the Streets Have No Name to Red Hill Mining Town is about as good as it gets. It definitely does drop off after that, and I would have preferred that they split the wealth a bit between the collection of all-time classics and forgettable album fillers. Maybe, kind of spread out the classics a little more instead of packing them into the beginning. But when you start out that far ahead of everyone else, I guess that does kind of give you room to slow down a little bit on the home stretch. Number 26 was Tiger's Blood from 2024. This is from the artist Waxahachie, which I listened to on December 8th. I checked out Waxahachie's 2017 work out in the Storm in 2017. I was listening to a lot of music that year, and I do remember enjoying it, but I hadn't checked out much of her work since then. And I haven't really, that album didn't really stick with me either outside of Silver. The song Silver, really, I still listen to today. But Tiger's Blood is certainly the more memorable of the two. It's filled to the brim with great songwriting and vocal performances from Katie Crutchfield, who is the kind of the main artist here. It goes by Waxahachie. It's something like a modern Car Wheels on a Gravel Road, and it's damn near as good too. Number 27 was Sword and Stone, the 2024 album from Ryan Adams, which I listened to on December 12th. And now we enter the Ryan Adams wing of the year, as I caught up on the no less than 5 full-length albums that this singer-songwriter put out this year. The 4 of them, which including Sword and Stone, were actually released on January 1st, which is an interesting strategy and, in my opinion, a good way to blunt the impact of a singular release. That said, I appreciated how all of them clearly had a concept behind them, with Sword and Stone being definitely the most widely appealing of the bunch. So stay tuned to see how I rank all of those albums here shortly, which I'm going to be getting into that. It kind of makes me realize that maybe I should check in on Ryan Adams right now just to see if he did something similar this year. He did not. Okay. No new albums from Ryan Adams since his last release, which was Black Hole, which we'll get into here shortly. But number 28 was Prisoners, which was another album from Ryan Adams this year. I also listened to this one on December 12th. This is the setting I'm most accustomed to hearing Adams as in. So this is a live album. Because prior to this year, the only album I had ever heard from him was his first live at Carnegie Hall double LP from 2015. I listened to that one while on a trip to Ohio with my brother and stepdad. And I still think when I think about Ohio, I think about that album, which is kind of interesting. One of those tracks came on in the car with Reagan, and I realized how upper alley he is. He's got a lot of similarities with John Craigie. So I was encouraged to check out what he'd been up to and discovered the glut of albums he released this year. Unfortunately, Reagan is a little bit averse to giving him much of a shot, even though she loved that song that came on English Girls Approximately from Carnegie Hall. She actually called it incredible. But she's kind of averse to him because he's got a little bit of a spotty history with like the Me Too movement. But as for me, I've looked over worse, like Kanye West and Marilyn Manson. So he seems to have apologized for whatever it was he did. So I hope she gives him a shot moving forward. He's definitely got some chops. Definitely got some good music behind him. Also on December 12th, I listened to For Emma Forever Ago, the 2008 debut of Bon Iver. This was me giving this, from what I can tell, fairly legendary album another shot because the first time I heard it was a few years ago with Reagan. And I have to say, I was not a fan, which was surprising to me considering how solid I thought his later work was. Going back to it now, I have to say I was probably a little bit too hard on it, but at the same time, there's really nothing here that I would ever need to go back to. The story of the album's conception is definitely cool, though, so give it a Google if you're interested. Number 30 was Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, The Reunion Tour from 1999. This came out this year, 2024, and I listened to it on December 12th. As I noted earlier, I closed out this year with a lot of live Springsteens to prepare to see a lot of these to close out the chronological list and look forward to seeing how they rank with the rest of the 2024 releases. Here's a hint, they're high. This one is taken from his reunion tour with the E Street Band in 1999. Then on December 13th, I listened to Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, the Born in the USA tour from 84 and 85, another release from this year. Pretty much a straight recording of live renditions of Springsteen's legendary Born in the USA album with some bonuses from that tour. Number 32 was The Velvet Underground and Nico, which I listened to in December 15th. This album came out in 1967. One of the most interesting albums ever recorded, I would argue. The Velvet Underground and Nico would take a very lengthy Wikipedia article to fully encapsulate its place in history. This is definitely an acquired taste album, but if it connects with you, as it did for many garage band leaders in the late 60s, it truly is one of the most special recordings of all time. If it doesn't, as was the case with my stepdad back in my high school days, it will sound like, I think he called it white noise recorded with a tin can. So, yeah, think of it as kind of the ultimate musical Rorschach test. Okay, 33 and 34 were a couple more Ryan Adams albums. 33 was Heat Wave, which I listened to on December 16th, which is definitely the most rocking of his 2024 work. And then on December 20th, I listened to 1985, which is a very interesting punk record from Adams, which was made up of a bunch of songs that are almost all, maybe even every single one, but almost all of them were less than 2 minutes. I'm going through the track list here right now. There was one, no, two. The last two songs were longer than 2 minutes, and many of them were actually less than one. So, very interesting album. We'll see how it ranks here shortly. And then number 35 was the last album I listened to from Ryan Adams this year, which was Black Hole. That one he released actually in December 2024, so not part of the January 1st releases. I listened to this one on December 21st. So yeah, that album was kind of closest in style to Sword and Stone, I would say, if you had to compare it to the other ones. So kind of more of like an album like you would expect him to put out. Number 36 was Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, the 2003 debut from Wilco, which I also listened to on December 21st. One of the most legendary albums of the early 2000s, Yankee Hotel Foxtrot appeared at number 3 on Rolling Stone's greatest albums of that decade, which was the first list that I ever saw from them back then, back when I thought they had some credibility. The evocative album cover of those two buildings in Chicago has always stuck with me, as has roughly half of the album. There's like several songs from it that I keep going back to. So I decided to go back and check on the other half to see if I was sleeping on yet more great music. It turns out I wasn't, but unlike you two, at least Wilco had the pacing sense to spread out the good tracks throughout the album. So you got to give him credit for that. Number 37, 50 Years of Swing, the 1987 release from Tito Puente, which I also listened to on December 21st. This one was more than 2 years in the making, considering I don't have a drop of Hispanic blood in my veins. I had no idea who Tito Puente was, but it turns out he was a pretty legendary songwriter and band leader of mambo, whatever, and Latin jazz during the 50s and 60s. Now, this collection of 50 songs, which was highlighted as 5 stars in Rolling Stone's album guide from 2004, which I still have, it's actually not on Spotify, so I kind of had to piece together the track list myself. It took me more than 2 years to fully get through, which is absurd for an album of just 50 songs. But I have to say, this is a surprisingly listenable collection of music, even without knowing a word of what is being said. Puente was clearly a national treasure, an extremely skilled writer, and I don't think there's any question that his influence is still being felt today. If you don't believe me, walk into literally any Tex-Mex restaurant here in Texas and hear for yourself, or the nearest suburban construction area. Number 38 is If It Takes Forever, the 2024 album from Brett Dennen, which I listened to on December 23rd. I have seen 3 John Craigie shows with Reagan's family so far, which with likely many more to come. And while I like him a lot, each time he has kind of been in some ways overshadowed by the other artists that have outperformed him. So the first time I saw him was at Red Rocks 3 years ago. He opened for Andy Frasco, who, despite leaving early, made Reagan's family super fans. Later, I saw him with Reagan and Brett, where Grace Rowland from The Deer opened for him and absolutely blew Brett away to the point where Craigie just couldn't compete. And I was also very impressed with her. And then most recently, Brett Dennen opened for him when I saw him, and I think that was in October 2022, which is the last time I saw him. And that shocked me as well with the kind of the quality of his songwriting, particularly on his standout anthem Sydney, which the two of them actually performed together during the show. While this 2024 album starts off a little shaky, it really comes into its own after the first few tracks and delivers some true standouts like Come My Way, Time to Wake Up, and Talking with Your Eyes Closed. I used no less than 5 of these tracks in Reagan's new playlist, and the first, Rise and Shine, almost immediately drove her to tears. Granted, she's as soft and emotional as people come, but still, it's got to speak for something. Number 39 was Mahashmashana, the 2024 album from Father John Misty, which I listened to on Christmas Eve. It has been nearly a decade since I heard an album that kind of blew me away as much as I was by Father John's Misty Mahashmashana. While I was familiar with his work, specifically from 2017's Pure Comedy, again, 2017 I was driving a lot that year for work, and so I was listening to a lot of albums. This is way above even the rest of the Good Father's otherwise stellar work, primarily on the strength of its musicianship on top of the always excellent songwriting from Misty himself. Per Wikipedia, Mahashmashana is the first Father John Misty album to feature the full participation of Tillman, that's his real name, his longtime backing band, guitarists Chris Dixie Darley and David Vandervelde, bassist Eli Thompson, pianists and keyboardist Kyle Flynn and John Titterington, and drummer Dan Bailey. Regarding their involvement, Tillman stated, "This time around, I wanted to get the band in there and see what happened." Well, the answer is simple: magic. Then the next two albums I listened to were Songs of Conscience and then Songs of Celebration, two releases from Bruce Springsteen this year as part of the live series. Both of these include a good mix of Springsteen's work throughout the decades, and I particularly appreciate their highlight of many of his deeper cuts that don't typically appear on compilations like these. They've introduced me to a number of songs from his lesser known works and have reinvigorated my already quite vigorated love and respect for him as an artist. So number 42 was The Bends, the 1995 album from Radiohead, which I listened to on December 27th. My early reading of Rolling Stone definitely got me into Radiohead early on in my development as a music fan, and as such, many of their early recordings remain very special to me, including The Bends. While I don't really feel the need to go back to many of the tracks from The Bends individually today, at various points in my life, almost all of them were my favorite from the album and have hit me hard in various ways. Today, my favorite track is the title track, but there was a time where you might have got me to say something like Fake Plastic Trees was like the greatest song ever if I wasn't claiming it was motion picture soundtrack from another Radiohead album, Kid A. Either way, as a body of work, The Bends definitely holds up 30 years later. And then the last couple years, or albums I listened to this year, right as the year was coming to a close, was again two selections from the live series, Songs from Around the World Volume 2 and Songs Undercover Volume 3, both from Bruce Springsteen. Um, Still fun, but definitely kind of the less interesting of the live releases this year, particularly the Undercover one because it's just covers. So yeah. But yeah, of all those 44 albums that I listened to in 2024, 28 were from 2024 proper. So now I'd like to rank those albums that came out this year and kind of get a definitive look at my favorite albums from the year. We're going to get into that. But first, I'm going to pull up my Texas Roadhouse app and I'm going to see if I can secure myself a spot on the wait list. It is a Saturday night as I record this, and I have not eaten anything yet today and I'm very excited to go there. The wait list is currently an hour and 30 minutes, which is probably perfect for how long it's going to take for me to complete this recording. So yeah, an hour and 30 minutes from now will be 8:35. It's 7:07 right now. So there you go. There's a timeline for me trying to wrap this up. Okay, so number 28. Okay, just be clear. Previously, I ranked the albums based just in order of how I listened to them. Now I'm ranking my favorite albums from this year. All these albums released in 2024. So here's how I'd rank them. Number 28, 1985 by Ryan Adams. I respect 1985 as a concept album of short songs, which realistically are a little more than concepts rather than full works. The result is unsurprisingly a very uneven album filled to the brim with kind of half-formed ideas. Of the 29 songs on this album, How to Belong is the clear standout. It's also maybe the least punky of them, so take that for what you will. Number 27 is JPEG Raw from Gary Clark Jr. While solid from start to finish, this was just kind of a disappointingly forgettable album from an artist that used to frankly blow my mind. Bring back the guitar theatrics and give the people what they want, Gary. Play to your strengths. Number 26 was Clancy from 21 Pilots. As I noted earlier, an album that sounds a lot better live than in the studio, to the point where Tyler Joseph actually wrote in sing-along sequences in some of the songs themselves, which sound a lot more hollow and cringy without an actual crowd singing to back them up. But navigating, I will contend, definitely don't skip that one. And also, check them out live. They put it together a nice show. But number 25 is Pagan Church from John Craigie and the TK Holy Know Nothings. John Craigie is just one of those artists that sound better by himself than with others. A Dylan-esque trait that might be a great compliment. But unfortunately, Pagan Church is filled with others, specifically TK and the Holy Know Nothings, who Craigie probably should have known better than to invite for this recording session. Number 24 is GNX from Kendrick Lamar. There's truly nothing to write home about with GNX. No standout tracks or notable disasters, just 45 minutes of very solid rap music. Take it or leave it. Number 23, A Gory Mori May by the Smashing Pumpkins. Many of us who lived through the 90s have aged gracefully out of our over the top edgy phase. The Smashing Pumpkins have not, and quite frankly, that is delightful. A Gory Mori May falls off a cliff toward the end. But outside of those last couple of tracks, this is just a delightful listen for those nostalgic for the edgy days of old in the 90s. Number 22, I have Orgy of the Damned by Slash. There's not a whole lot more to say about this one. It's Slash. He's playing the blues with a host of guests to very consistently good results. I'd say Stormy Monday with Beth Hart is the best track here, but it's also, probably the best track just in general, just in terms of the ones that he chose to cover. So I guess that comes as no big surprise. Number 21, I have Sword and Stone by Ryan Adams. Outside of 1985, which, as noted, is more of an experiment than an effort to make a great album, I'd put Sword and Stone toward the bottom of Ryan A's 2024 efforts. While the title track is the best song he put out this year, this album had the lowest lows, like other than 1985, like Nuclear War and Al Wade, which kind of dragged the overall package down just enough to put it below most of his other work this year. And we'll be moving on to that very quickly with number 20, Heat Wave by Ryan Adams. While I think Heat Wave is the stronger album when compared to its sister Sword and Stone due to its consistency, it also lacks the standouts of the more subdued work. So take that for what you will. Number 19 is If It Takes Forever by Brett Dennen. As I noted earlier, my first impressions of If It Takes Forever were actually pretty negative, but man, did that thing really take off after the first 6 tracks with Time to Wake Up, which should have been the album starter if it wasn't Rise to Shine. It's class consciousness mixed, really kind of, I guess it's it kind of sounds like an easy listening song. Like it's very subdued, but it has like this really class conscious lyrics. Kind of recalls the best of Bob Dylan, but interestingly, it's when Denon gets his most sentimental on songs like "Come My Way" and "Talking with My Eyes Closed" that he delivers his best work. He could use an editor, but he certainly exhibits flashes of brilliance more often than most. So number 18 was Joker Foley Adieu, music from the motion picture. Joaquin Phoenix and Lady Gaga here, of course. Say what you will about the controversial film, there's some great music in it, and all of that is on display here. Lady Gaga is obviously unimpeachable as one of the greatest pop stars of our age, but Joaquin Phoenix is no slouch himself, managing to convey Arthur Fleck's mixed emotions and mental states while delivering strong vocal performances. Number 17, I have Black Hole from Ryan Adams. It's hard to get more rock solid than Ryan Adams' most recent work, which, like Heatwave, lacks any key standouts, with the exception of Tomorrowland. Is that the Disney World fan of me talking? I can't deny the possibility. But I don't know, man. That plinking guitar hook mixed with Adams' own wistful vocals is pretty damn irresistible. Number 16, I have The Tortured Poets Department, The Anthology by Taylor Swift. Unlike with Ryan Adams' output, I would put The Tortured Poets Department among the most uneven albums of the year. It really is kind of mind-blowing to have a song as good as the title track, which may be the greatest straight-up pop song ever, just a few minutes removed from the doldrums of Florida. But at the same time, when you write as many songs as Swift does, some of them are virtually guaranteed to be duds. While I would argue she could get away with simply not releasing those, the level of consistency she has achieved throughout her career, despite a constantly changing soundscape, make her truly one of the greatest artists of our modern age. I would probably put her up there as the best since the turn of the century. The Tortured Poets Department is yet another building block of that ongoing legacy. But number 15, I have A Stroll Through Johto from TPR. There's no question I'm a sucker for instrumental music, particularly music as sentimental and nostalgic to me as the Pokemon Gold and Silver soundtrack, but the best track here is the Twinkling Global Terminal, which I have no nostalgia for, so maybe TPR really is just that damn good. Number 14, my top Ryan Adams album is Prisoners. Unsurprising to me because it is the live one. Kind of like John Craigie, he's just better in front of a crowd with none of the distractions of the unlimited options of his studio. Standouts here include Haunted House, Outbound Train, and Doomsday, some of which we may just be discussing later with the songs of the year. Number 13 was Only God Was Above Us by Vampire Weekend. Vampire Weekend have a knack for taking what would otherwise be fairly standard alt rock and putting a unique spin on that, typically through their instrumentation. And Only God Was Above Us is no exception. Fans will be thrilled, and the rest of us will find plenty to enjoy here as well, particularly the closer and Mary Boone. Number 12, I have What Do We Know Now by Jay Mascis. There may be an element of bias here considering how long I have stuck with Mascis over the years. There was a time when I would put him among my favorite artists ever, and while he has fallen for me over time, it's nice to see he is still delivering quality albums like this, even as he shakes up his instrumentation with a full band this time. Number 11, I have Tiger's Blood from Waxahachie. I expected Tiger's Blood to be good, but I don't know that I expected it to be this good. If you call this country, and it's kind of on the borderline of it, it has to be the best record I've heard in that genre in a decade or so, maybe since Jamie Johnson's The Guitar Song. Standouts like Three Sisters, Right Back to It, Crowbar, and 365. No real misses in between. You have a strong recipe for success. So, getting into my top 10 albums of the year, starting with the live series, Songs Undercover Volume 3. Bruce Springsteen is the greatest songwriter of all time, so of course, a cover album isn't going to go as well as a collection of his original material. That said, there are some great deep cuts here, like Jolie Blonde, Trapped, Tom Joad, and Long Black Veil, brought to life to their full potential by the power of the E Street Band, so this is certainly not a collection to skip. Number 9, I have Greatest Hits, Just Kidding Live, No Hits by John Craigie. While I wouldn't quite put this latest set as Craigie's best, I would still, I think, put Opening for Steinbeck at the top of his live albums. There's certainly a case to be made for it. His storytelling is sardonic as ever, and the music in between is consistently great, with key standouts like the new Mallory and the improvement on the old standard Michael Collins. If you have any chance of falling in love with Craigie, as Reagan and her family have, this is a great entry point. Number 8, I have Moon Music by Coldplay. I need to go back and listen to Coldplay's earlier work to be able to compare it with this, but as it stands, it's hard for me to imagine it being too much better than this. Moon Music definitely mixes hit makers like Feels Like I'm Falling in Love and Good Feelings with experimental instrumentalism on Moon Music and the rainbow emoji, which, I don't know what else to call it. The title track is literally just a rainbow emoji. And then you get the heartfelt crooner, The Karate Kid, on the bonus disc for good measure. And what's crazy is how all of it is great. If, like me, you wonder how Coldplay can be as successful as they are, currently the most listened to band in the world. They're I think number 9 in terms of all musical artists, but just as a band instead of a solo artist, they are number 1. Give this a whirl and see if you can't connect the dots. So number 7 is the live series Songs from Around the World from Bruce Springsteen. The I guess now second lowest of Springsteen's live compilation work this year. The lowest of the ones that included his original writings. Um, Comes in at still number 7, so it kind of gives you an idea of how strong these albums are. Songs from Around the World lacks the cohesion of some of the other collections, given that the selection's only common denominator is being performed abroad. The selection criteria also feels like someone threw 15 darts at a massive board encompassing all of Springsteen's music. But name another artist you could do that for and come up with something this good. Here's the truth: there are none. So number 6 was Songs of Conscience from Bruce Springsteen's live series. One thing I really respect about Springsteen's ongoing live series collections is their inclusion of many deep cuts from his more recent or underrated work from, say, the 90s, for example. The result is something like Songs of Conscience, which coasts a bit on unadulterated classics like The Promised Land and Born in the USA, but it also highlights some great stuff that even I, as a superfan, had not heard before, like the previously unreleased Sun City or Youngstown from The Ghost of Tom Joad. Questionable inclusions like 57 Channels bring the package down a bit, but this is still Bruce Springsteen, and he's still the best. Number 5 is the Born in the USA tour from 84 and 85 from Bruce Springsteen. As great as Born in the USA, the studio album, is, I think it's still one of the greatest albums ever composed. It doesn't quite have the staying power to me as his 70s work does, so even a straight rendition like this can't quite match up to some of the other live collections released this year. Nothing here is really essential over the original work, but those versions of Dancing in the Dark and Downbound Train are pretty damn sweet. Number 4, another selection from the live series, Songs of Celebration from Bruce Springsteen. While Songs of Celebration is essentially tied with the Born in the USA tour, I'll give it to this collection for not being a retread of an already established album and for its inclusion of some truly fantastic underrated works like Better Days, Out in the Street, Roll of the Dice, and Sherry Darling. And this version of Dancing in the Dark is even better than the one from the USA tour, so, there's also that. Number three, I have Bruce Springsteen's Road Diary from 2024. So this is the one that he put together from his most recent world tour. As noted, I may be a bit biased here, considering this is the only Springsteen tour I've ever attended live. But this set is just great stuff, and the fact that he can still deliver it as well as he can, no doubt, the full power of the E Street Band backing him helps. Is truly incredible. Again, Springsteen's inclusion of some of his most overlooked and newer stuff is laudable at his age, where he could easily be coasting off the masterpieces he wrote a lifetime ago. Take a listen to Mary's Place. Don't play that song. My Love Will Not Let You Down and Night Shift. And while you're at it, don't miss the incredible version of The Rising. Currently the best version I've ever heard of that song. Or better yet, just listen to the whole thing from start to finish. Number two, I had, and I really thought this was going to be number one for majority of the time that I was working on this, was Bruce Springsteen and the Street Band's reunion tour from 1999. Not only is the reunion tour the best of Springsteen's live output this year, I would say this is the best collection of live music from him that I've heard. Unsurprisingly, the energy from the reunited E Street Band, which Springsteen had broken up 10 years prior, was second to none and potentially outstripping their output even in their prime. The group's rendition of Take 'Em As They Come is probably my favorite from this group, but there's a lot here that I had never heard before, like I Want to Be With You and Murder Incorporated, that stand nearly as tall as the classics like Backstreet's The Promised Land and Prove It All Night. Well, and then you have the absolutely gorgeous and heartfelt version of If I Fall Behind, and then, oh yeah, then the gobstopping version of Incident on 57th Street, which is actually probably the best from this album. Yeah, this is just Springsteen and the band at their best, and it is absolutely shocking to me this is not my number one. But that honor must go to Mahashmashana from Father John Misty. It is one of those masterpieces that is just so good it's hard to put into words. You take Father John Misty, one of the great wordsmiths we've seen since Springsteen himself, finally combined with the great music that his typically sparse compositions have been missing up until now. And the result is nothing short of breathtaking. Each one of these tracks starts slow and it builds to an incredible crescendo from the title track to the closer. What's also impressive is the range on display here, from the rabble-rousing She Cleans Up to the whimsical Mental Health to the climactic title track to the eerily dreamy Screamland. The soundscape here is quite simply one of the most fascinating and unforgettable I've ever heard. This is a modern day classic that everyone should at least give a shot. It's not only the best album of 2024, but I would put it in the top 5 albums I've ever heard. So there we go. We've discussed the albums I listened to this year and ranked the ones that released in 2024. And now I want to break it down even further to highlight what I consider to be the 50 best songs of 2024. You'll note there's a lot of Springsteen here, but to make it fair to everyone else, I've decided to only include the Springsteen songs that I either didn't know before these recordings or that I feel improve upon previous versions to a notable degree. You can also find a playlist version of this list on Spotify, which I will link to the description of this episode. And you can also just find it for yourself if you just look up my profile, Andrew Burns with an ES, and my playlist, Top 50 Songs of 2024. Now let's get into it. With number 50, Human Touch. This is from Bruce Springsteen live at Estadi Olympic Lewis Company's Barcelona, Spain from April 28th, 2023. You've got to respect Springsteen for busting out the title track for perhaps his most maligned album ever, Human Touch, on his most recent world tour. And more power to him for doing it because it only hammers home that Springsteen at his most creatively aimless is still better than what 90% of artists can put out on their best day. This 7-minute romp is a scorcher, particularly in its final 2 minutes, where Springsteen lets his band do what they do best. Number 49, I have My Boy Only Breaks His Favorite Toys by Taylor Swift. Why Swift felt like she had to double down on this concept with the ill-fated I Could Fix Him is beyond me, but this is Jack Antonoff produced poppy brilliance that characterized 2019's Lover, but with a darker edge of the Tortured Poets package. Number 48, I have Navigating from 21 Pilots, one of my most listened to songs of 2024, number 36 to be precise, according to Spotify, and the best song I've ever heard from 21 Pilots. This was a jolt of energy during the live set, and it was pushed forward by a legitimately strong rock riff. Number 47, I have Out in the Street, live at Brendan Byrne Arena in East Rutherford, New Jersey, on August 6th, 1984, by Bruce Springsteen. Out in the Street is a solid Springsteen cut from the river, but it's just one of those songs that's made to be played live, and this energetic cut from Songs of Celebration from the Born in the USA tour exemplifies that. Number 46, I have Haunted House Live by Ryan Adams. Adams' best cut from his Prisoners Live album, which I've noted is my favorite of his 2024 works in total. Haunted House is pretty much everything Adams does best. Woe Is Me crooning backed by great acoustic riffing in front of a live audience. At number 45, I have Point Blank live at First Union Center, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, on September 25th, 1999, by Bruce Springsteen. Another scorcher from the river that works better in a live crowd. But unlike the rollicking out in the street, Point Blank is a slow burner that features some rare understated playing from the brilliant Clarence Clemens, who turns out can play slow and sensual just as well as he can loud and jovial. Number 44, we have Rosalita come out tonight live at Capitol Theater, Passaic, New Jersey, from September 20th, 1978, by Bruce Springsteen. Despite being a gigantic fan of Springsteen, and particularly The Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle, I've never been a huge proponent of that legendary album's most famous epic, which is Rosalita. But something about this version from the Darkness on the Edge of Town tour really works for me. The band sounds very clear and under control here, which gives my personal favorite member of the band, pianist Roy Batan, to shine more than normal on this song, and the result is by far the best rendition of this song that I've ever heard. And number 43, I have The Rising, live at Parco Urbano G. Bassani, Ferrara, Italy, on May 18th, 2023, from Bruce Springsteen. From what I remember, The Rising is the first Springsteen song I ever heard, which was because it was included in Rolling Stone's Top 100 Songs of the 2000s, back when I started reading in early 2010. At the time, I really enjoyed it, but I did get burned out on it, especially after discovering the litany of superior tracks in Springsteen's legendary library. But, after being away from it for years, this rendition of the 9/11 based classic really connected with me, particularly with the violent guitar work from either Springsteen or Steve Van Zandt, whoever's playing lead on this recording. At number 42, I have Cianwood City, or Cyanwood City, perhaps, by TPR and Abby the Oboist. Pokemon Gold and Silver soundtrack particularly shines with its city music, and Cinewood City, uh, by the shore, really exemplifies that. TPR's version is gorgeous, and the pianist taking the first verse and then giving Abby the second was a great move. Abby, in particular, is a fantastic addition to this album, and this is the last that we'll be hearing from her either. But at number 41, I have Night Shift live at T-Mobile Center in Kansas City, Missouri, on February 18th, 2023, from Bruce Springsteen. I had never heard this standout from Springsteen's 22 soul-based album, Only the Strong Survive, until I saw his performance of it in Dallas, which was just 1 week before this recording. It's a really great crooner that pays homage to some of the greats of the past, like Marvin Gaye and Jackie Wilson, both of which I listened to extensively in my younger days. It's really a touching track, particularly live. At number 40, I have The Karate Kid from Coldplay. The understated piano crooning from Chris Martin on The Karate Kid is not typically the recipe for an earworm, but man, I just have not been able to get this song out of my head pretty much ever since I heard it. It's a heartfelt love song that is interestingly sung to a man, which I think probably makes it very special for those within the LGBT community. But even outside of that, a great love song is a great love song, and The Karate Kid is one of the best I've ever heard. Number 39 is The Black Dog by Taylor Swift, a phenomenal example of the storytelling prowess of Swift, who I view as something of an updated and female version of Bruce Springsteen, who I, of course, consider the master of the technique. I know nothing about The Black Dog, which is basically a bar where Swift's lead character in this song once rendezvoused with an erstwhile lover, or if it's even a real place, but it sure feels like I've been there after this 4-minute tearjerker. At number 38, I have Don't Play That Song, live at Amway Center, Orlando, Florida, from February 5th, 2023, by Bruce Springsteen. Another cut from Only the Strong Survive that Springsteen sadly did not elect to play at the Dallas concert just 5 days after this performance. This one edges out Night Shift as a more energetic performance that harkens back to the best work of groups like the Drifters, the Temptations, and the Supremes. Number 37, we have the E Street Shuffle live at the Apollo Theater in New York on March 9th, 2012, by Bruce Springsteen. One of the great surprises for me for Springsteen's 2023 tour was that he included a full horn section, which allowed for great versions of some of his earliest work from The Wild, the Innocent, and the Street Shuffle. But while a version of the Street Shuffle, which he did not play in Dallas, or no, he did play in Dallas, but it did not make the live album. This version from 2012, which appears on Songs of Celebration, is no less exemplary, particularly with the extended coda. At number 36, I have Come My Way by Brett Dennen. I already noted that Dennen is at his best when he goes heartfelt, and this sweet cut from It Takes Forever, If It Takes Forever, stands as the best example as the best song on the album. Another earworm I've had trouble erasing ever since I first heard it, and a big part of my last minute decision to make a romantic playlist for my wife on Christmas Eve. Number 35, we have National Park from TPR. Anybody who has played Gold and Silver knows the National Park is where it's at for wistful piano music. Even the Game Boy's original chiptune version was fantastic and honestly may still be my favorite, but the composers slowed it down and brought in piano for Heart Gold Soul Silver in 2010, and TPR has perfected that slow burn approach here. At number 34, I have Hope by Vampire Weekend. This piano plinking 8-minute closer to Only God Was Above Us would be a great song even without its unifying message, which only serves to send it into the stratosphere as one of Vampire Weekend's greatest works to date. At number 33, I have Sun City, live at Belleville Velodrome, Cape Town in SA, whatever that is. January 29th, 2014 was when this was recorded, and it's, of course, from Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. This absolutely killer rocker that seeks to unify the working class, as well as rock and roll and hip hop, against the man was, to my knowledge, actually unreleased prior to its inclusion on Songs of Conscience this year. It's also one of the rare tracks written by Springsteen's longtime collaborator, Stephen Van Zandt. It's not easy to make out the lyrics on this raucous track, but when the hook is as good as this one, they're secondary anyway. Number 32 was War Dreams of Itself by the Smashing Pumpkins. Agori Mori may be uneven, but when Billy Corgan and company are on, they're delivering some of the band's best work, including this anti-war anthem that could have easily been from the band's 90s heyday. At number 31, I have I Want to Be With You, live at Continental Airlines Arena in East Rutherford, New Jersey on July 18th, 1999 by Bruce Springsteen. This outtake from The River was certainly not the conventional choice for Springsteen to kick off his reunion concerts with the E Street Band in 99, but it also couldn't be more perfect and a great exemplification of how deep his catalog runs. At number 30, I have Mary's Place, live at Prudential Center, Newark, New Jersey, on April 14th, 2023. Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. While the song The Rising was the first Springsteen song I ever heard, it's still never gone, or I've never gone and listened to the entire Rising album, which apparently features this irresistible gem that I must say does clash with the overall somber 9/11 message elsewhere on the album. But boy, does this shine on a live stage with the full power of the E Street Band. By number 29, I have Michael Collins live from John Craigie. Michael Collins was actually one of the first Craigie songs I ever heard because it is included on Opening for Steinbeck, which I listened to on my first date with my wife. But while it's mostly played for laughs on that version, this slower, more heartfelt rendition that he dedicates to his dad really changes the takeaway and improves it significantly, I would say. At number 28, I have Who Goes There by the Smashing Pumpkins. I've always thought of the Smashing Pumpkins as having two primary gears, kind of a sad, wistful one and an angry, rocking one. And while War Dreams of Itself is definitely the latter, Who Goes There is more the former, though with a decidedly more upbeat tone than I'm used to hearing from them. At number 27, I have Eden by the Smashing Pumpkins. Nobody can say Corgan and company don't know how to kick off an album with a bang, and that's exactly what they did with the Gory Mori May's opening number, Eden. It starts off as more of a Black Sabbath style slow burner before launching into an also Black Sabbath like 7-minute metal opus that wouldn't be out of place on 13, subject matter and all. Number 26, I have Youngstown, live at Quicken Loans Arena in Cleveland, Ohio, from February 23rd, 2016, by Bruce Springsteen. Another deep cut from the oft-forgotten Ghost of Tom Joad record. Youngstown is a shockingly poignant report on America's penchant for forgetting the working class that makes the wealth of the 1% possible, like the dark inevitable outcome that Born in the USA was rallying against. Again, it never ceases to amaze how deep and wide Springsteen's catalog goes, and I love this live series for highlighting some of the hidden gems like this. Number 25, we have The Ties That Bind, live at Staples Center, Los Angeles, California, on October 23rd, 1999, by Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. I've always been a fan of this Ode to Brotherhood from the River, but this live version from the reunited E Street Band rings all the truer and was a phenomenal selection for the tour. It's frankly incredible. And we're only at number 25. Number 24, New Barktown by TPR and Abby the Oboist. Everybody's intro to Gold and Silver, and perhaps the most nostalgic piece of music in my life, New Barktown, is a treat, no matter what version you're getting. But like its version, or his version of Cyanwood City, TPR's arrangement featuring Abby the Oboist only hits harder. At number 23, I have 365 by Waxahachie. This powerful, love-stricken country crooner is a real showstopper, featuring Katie Crutchfield's best lyricism and vocal performance on her fantastic 2024 effort, Tiger's Blood. It sounds something like an updated version of Lucinda Williams' Greenville, but with a more nebulous ending that leaves the interpretation to the listener. At number 22, we have Trapped, live at Boston Garden in Boston, Massachusetts, on December 13th, 1992, from Bruce Springsteen. This stand out from Springsteen's third collection of live covers, builds to an incredible crescendo when he and whoever the hell he has playing with him at this stage of his E Street bandless career reaches it around the 1 minute 50 mark and never lets go again. At number 21, I have Sword and Stone by Ryan Adams. Easily Ryan Adams' best song of 2024. This energetic 2 minute rocker is an unimpeachable vision of a plugged in singer songwriter at his best. At number 20, I have Josh Tillman and the Accidental Dose from Father John Misty. Here we find the good father at his most Lou Reed, but while this starts out as kind of a low-key affair, the arrival of a hellish string section changes the game a minute in and builds to an unforgettable conclusion. At number 19, I have Euphoria by Kendrick Lamar. Not like us, maybe the mainstream hit, but surely there are hip hop heads out there that agree that Euphoria is Kendrick's best work of 2024, bringing both his feud with Drake and the rap game as a whole to new heights. We're Not Like Us is a victory lap. Euphoria is Lamar locked in and running up the score, like the run up to the rim that sets up the coming slam dunk that was Not Like Us. At number 18, I have Down Bad by Taylor Swift. The song title pretty much says it all. This is classic Taylor Swift at her best, complete with a twinkling production from Jack Antonoff and an irresistible chorus from the reigning queen of the pop world herself. At number 17, I have Crowbar from Waxahachie, the best song from Waxahachie's Tiger's Blood. Crowbar mixes easy listening with her Dylan-esque lyricism, again with a taste of Lucinda Williams. At number 16, I have Good Feelings by Coldplay. As shocking as it is, arguably Coldplay's most commercial recording for Moon Music, Good Feelings is also my favorite. The production here is just undeniably infectious, and when it's this good, sometimes it's all you really need. And Arya Starr's guest verse is also really killer here. At number 15, I have I Guess Time Just Makes Fools of Us All by Father John Misty. Here we find Father John at the grooviest we've ever seen him, a virtual impossibility on his previous records, and undeniably the best chance for any of the music from Mahash Mashana to be a hit. It is definitely his most listened to song from the album so far. Misty's sardonic wit is still as sharp as ever here, but it's amazing what having a great band behind you will do. Number 14, we have So High School by Taylor Swift. Another great track from Swift's second disc from Tortured Poets Department. Makes me wonder who is in charge of deciding what songs go where. Top billing for Florida? Really? But other than the title track of the LP, this is the catchiest of the songs here, filled with hilarious lyrics like Touch Me While Your Friends Play Grand Theft Auto that are just absurd enough to be relatable to, I don't know, tens of millions around the world. At number 13, we have Murder Incorporated, live at Continental Airlines Arena in East Rutherford, New Jersey, recorded on July 15th, 1999 by Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. I don't know how many bands have released a greatest hits collection and written new material that actually went on to become a legitimate great hit, but Springsteen attempted to do that with the last four tracks of his 1995 compilation. None of them actually went on to be titans in his discography, but this version of Murder Incorporated absolutely slays and gives credence to the argument that perhaps it should be. Number 12, I have Downbound Train, live at LA Memorial Coliseum in Los Angeles, California, recorded on September 27th, 1985, by Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. Most of Born in the USA's track list is made up of haunting stories from the dark side of America, but many people often miss these messages thanks to the E Street Band's jovial playing. That all goes away for perhaps the album's scariest and most desperate track, Downbound Train, which, like many Springsteen songs, it turned out is even better live. Those synths that close out this version from Roy Bittan are absolutely deadly. At number 11, I have Prove It All Night, live at First Union Center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, recorded on September 25th, 1999, from Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. It should come as no real surprise that the E Street Band was playing beyond the height of its powers, extra energized by the reunion tour of 1999, but the way they already take a stone cold classic from the 70s like Prove It All Night and then improve it more than 20 years later is no less impressive. There's no way around it. This is the greatest band of all time, playing at their most impassioned and motivated. What more could you want? At number 10, I have Mallory, live by John Craigie. While a lot of Craigie's tracklist has the unfortunate tendency of slipping into silliness, when he decides to go serious, or better yet, mix the silly with the serious, as he does here in this ode to a blind girl that came to one of his shows, he has the capability to create true magic. At number 9, I have Take 'Em As They Come, live at United Center in Chicago, Illinois, from September 30th, 1999, by Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. Here is the E Street Band as perhaps their most impressive, to the point my jaw actually dropped when I heard this rendition of what was nothing more than an outtake from The River, which I'll remind you was already a double LP. So, first of all, think about how good your songwriting has to be to pass over a certified banger like this, and then consider this decision to not only resurface it for the reunion tour, but perform it as brilliantly as this, making yet another definitive Springsteen recording on stage. Truly incredible. Number 8, I have Roll of the Dice, live at Arrowhead Pond in Anaheim, California from May 22nd, 2000, Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. Perhaps my favorite example of Springsteen electing to highlight deep cuts through hits through the live series. I'd never heard Roll of the Dice, which is apparently a choice cut from his oft-maligned Human Touch album, before this recording, and was blown away by how good it was. Even Springsteen, at his most creatively bankrupt, was putting together some great music. He just needed the E Street Band behind him to effectively communicate it. Well, here he unites the two to phenomenal effect. At number 7, I have Screamland from Father John Misty, another evolving soundscape from John Misty and Company. Screamland actually starts off quite beautifully, with strings backing his soft vocal performance before it devolves into a frightening, speaker-blowing climax. Yet the central message, stay young, keep dreaming, is surprisingly positive for Misty. We love dichotomies here, and this is one of the best examples. At number 6, I have She Cleans Up from Father John Misty. We continue our tour of the greatness of Misty's Mahashmashana with this truly fascinating rocker that couldn't contrast more with the opening title track and yet is no less phenomenal. What starts as a kind of a Beatles-esque track morphs into a prophetic rallying cry. For what, you ask? Well, that's part of the fun. At number 5, I have Mental Health from Father John Misty, another classic case of this genius songcrafter mixing a truly gorgeous soundscape with some of the most depressing subject matter you could imagine. And somehow this dichotomy makes you think even more than any shrink ever could. At number 4, I have Mahashmashana from Father John Misty. As incredible as the rest of the album is, Father John Misty saved his best work for his first and title track. This 9-minute epic is only comprised of 3 massive slow burn verses, each building not only off of each other, but also the underlying string track that, again, somehow feels so much bigger than anyone else's. It'll be hard to go back to the previously great music Father John has put together just because of how spare the soundscape is in those compared to this. In fact, going back to any other music seems hard after listening to this masterpiece, a true modern day classic. At number 3, I have The Tortured Poets Department by Taylor Swift. I'll never forget the first time the greatest pure pop song I've ever heard, entered my headphones following the also strong but more subdued opening track, Fortnite. Swift has a history of holding her biggest hits for the second track, like Cruel Summer, Blank Space, Cardigan. But this is her best work ever, even managing to eclipse her previous best, All Too Well, that held the title for over a decade. Here's Swift, self-deprecating yet self-assured, sent over the edge by Jack Antonoff's greatest production work yet. It's also one of the catchiest damn songs I've ever heard, and it will probably be stuck in my head for the rest of today as I type this. But when it's a song or love this good, how can you complain? At number 2, I have Global Terminal from TPR and The Clarinetist. As good as everything that has come before it, nothing has shocked me more than the strength of this simple little piano track from TPR and The Clarinetist, of a song from Heart Gold and Soul Silver that I had almost never heard, thanks to my lack of access to solid Wi-Fi for the majority of my teenage years. TPR smartly gives Clarinetist the majority of the melody, so that when he takes over as the song reaches its dramatic climax, it really hits home. And mind you, this is all over the course of just 2 minutes. Instrumentalism is at its finest and proof that you don't need a lot to create magic. And my number 1 song of 2024 is Incident on 57th Street, live at First Union Center from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, recorded on September 25th, 1999 by Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. It's almost painful to call this masterpiece from Springsteen's The Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle a hidden gem, considering it's among the greatest songs he ever wrote, but that's where the truth lies. On Spotify, it currently has just over 3 million lifetime listens. Compare that to the infinitely inferior Dancing in the Dark at nearly 900 million, and you start to see the discrepancy here. But like so many other songs I've come to discover this year, Incident wasn't perfected until the reunited and reinvigorated E Street Band got their hands on it in that legendary 1999 tour. Hear Springsteen and the band slow things down a bit, and that just makes everything in this 10 plus minute grand opus hit that much harder. Even better, the song actually has an ending, unlike the album version, so you have the definitive version of one of the greatest songs ever written, delivered to you here in the year of our Lord 2024. How can you ask for more? So that's a pretty definitive look at my year in music, which realistically only accounts for a third of the calendar year at best, since I listened to almost nothing before then outside of the my work instrumental playlist. It has been an amazing year that reminded me why I fell so hard in love with this medium in the first place years ago. And as a Laps fan, it was great to return. I would say the single biggest catalyst for this beyond the Colorado trip was deciding to restart work on a project that I have dreamed of completing for over a decade at this point, which is my own personal top 500 songs of all time, in the style of what Rolling Stone has put out. Um, I started work on this in late August, restarted work, I should say, in late August, and I'm still narrowing down my final selections, which I will then have to go back through to verify. So the work will continue well into 2025, but hopefully by this time next year, we'll be reflecting on this list and no doubt the massive series I will put together for the podcast to discuss and celebrate it. Until then, to close out our music based discussion, I always think it's fun to take a look at the Spotify Wrapped results. So let's take a look at that before moving on to the movies that I watched in 2024. If I can find where I saved these, here they are. Some of this stuff is not really that interesting. My biggest listening day was August 21st with 292 minutes. I think that was when I was first starting work on my top 500 songs project, so that's why I listened to so much. I think I might have been traveling that day, so that's kind of an interesting statistic, I guess. But let's take a look at my top artists, my top five artists on Spotify this year. Starting with number five was Daigoro 789, which was an artist that I recently discovered, I guess, over the course of probably last year. He's or they, whoever they are on Spotify. They do a lot of covers of the Legend of Zelda music. So basically, all my top five artists are instrumentalists or composers because of my instrumental work playlist. So yeah, Daigoro 789 is number five. Number four is I never know how to say this guy's name. Raymond Djawadi. He's the composer for Game of Thrones. Number three is Yasunori Nishiki, composer for Octopath Traveler. Number two is TPR, who we've talked about already. And number one is Nobuo Uematsu. I was a top 1% fan of Uematsu and listened to him for 1,812 minutes. And my longest listening streak was 5 days. Overall, I listened to 498 artists, it says this year. My top podcast is interesting. Number one was, well, let's go. Number three was ControlledBurnes. Number two was MinMax. And number one was Dev Game Club. So there you go. Want to look at my inspirations there. My top songs for the year. Number five was To the Moon main theme by Can Gao. Number four was the biggest shock here. BFG Division by Mick Gordon from Doom from 2016. Very interesting. It's a killer track for sure. Number three is Dancing on My Own by Robin from 2010. Man, if you were there in 2010, this was such a banger and it still holds up today. A masterpiece of pop music. Another contender for greatest pop song. Number two was Global Terminal by TPR and the Clear Nerdist, also my number two song of the year. I kept having to listen to it over and over again to make sure I really thought it was as good as I think it is. And then number one was The Tortured Poets Apartment by Taylor Swift. I streamed it 9 times, starting on September 21st, which was the first time that I ever heard of it. I was in the top 0.5% of listeners of this song globally, it says, which seems hard to believe with only 9 listens, but hey, whatever. Overall, I played 3,071 songs this year and listened for 19,477 minutes, which put me in the top 19% of listeners worldwide. So there you go. There's my Spotify figures on Spotify. Kind of goes without saying. Next, we move on to the movies I watched in 2024, which was also more than normal at 20 movies, 7 of which I viewed for the first time. A big part of my movie watching renaissance has been brought on by another podcast I have planned with my good friend Ismail Asak, who I'm planning to have on to discuss our top 10 films with. To that end, I've been trying to brush up on the contenders in between watching films that my wife has wanted to show me. For some reason, I didn't record when I watched the films that I did, so we'll just skip that part and go right into ranking the 20 films I watched this year in order of how much I enjoyed them. At number 20, I have Star Wars The Clone Wars from 2008, a pretty unsurprising pick for the bottom of the list. The Clone Wars is the animated film from 2008 that George Lucas used to kick off the lengthy and generally well liked animated series. I actually watched this for the first time in theaters back when it released, but had largely erased it from my mind before watching it again on a whim back in 2022. Then, around the middle of this year, I decided to embark on a great journey of watching all of the Star Wars content in chronological order, including the shows like The Clone Wars that I've never seen. So that included slogging through this again. While the film isn't unwatchable, it is generally pretty damn bad, with a throwaway storyline about saving Jabba the Hutt's son that, as far as I know, never returns to the series again. You'd think having an heir would disrupt Boba Fett's bid to take the throne many years into the future, but that's a problem for another time. For those interested, my wife and I are currently wrapping up season 2 of The Clone Wars, which we are watching in the recommended order rather than the release order. So it is starting to get better, but it has also been a bit of a slog at points so far. I'd like to have my wife on to chronicle our journey through the content we've seen so far, so look for that in the new year at some point. Number 19, I have Wicked from 2024. This may seem like a major shot across the bow at Wicked, which my wife has now claimed is her favorite movie ever. But the truth is, I did enjoy it more than I thought I would, as someone who has never seen the musical, and has been generally annoyed by the antics of the two leads as they promote what was no doubt one of the biggest releases of the year. The story has its touching moments, and the performances from both leads are surprisingly strong. However, the plot rushes to what I feel is an unnatural conclusion in the final act, which feels like it could have had more of the film's 2.5 hours of runtime put into it, rather than maybe a weird overlong dance sequence where people make fun of Elphaba because of her hat or whatever. Maybe some of that can be contributed to trying to fit the plot within the confines of the musical, but as a newcomer, it did lead to an uneven viewing experience. At number 18, I have Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace from 1999. Perhaps the most unfairly hated film of all time. Okay, that might be a stretch, but The Phantom Menace has to be in the running. It's not perfect by any stretch, but there's so much subtlety going on here that I think went over the head of most of the dumb Star Wars fans that were determined to hate the movie for Jar Jar Binks and Anakin being a kid or whatever. Liam Neeson as Qui-Gon Jinn is the obvious standout here, but don't miss Ian McDermott as Palpatine, who is already amazingly manipulative as he sets the stage for his ascendancy, which is a twist that, unless you were aware that he was the actor of Palpatine in Return of the Jedi, I think is done much better than the much more famous "I Am Your Father" twist from The Empire Strikes Back. At number 17, I have Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones from 2002, another contender for unfairly maligned film in the Star Wars canon, which, let's be honest, is basically all of them at this point. Attack of the Clones is really a tale of two movies. It's a fascinating conspiracy mystery uncovered slowly by Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan Kenobi, and a forbidden love story between Hayden Christensen's robotic Anakin and the goddess that is Natalie Portman's Padme Amidala. But you can't fathom having much of an interest in that awkward Skywalker, but, love strikes you in surprising places, so I don't have any issue with that. And while Christensen's acting is no doubt awkward and robotic at times, have you considered that that's what he was going for? Personally, the only indefensible part of the film to me is the botched lightsaber scrum at the end, but outside of that, I find Attack of the Clones to be an excellent film that builds toward the inevitably tragic third act and sets the stage for the saga as one of the all-time greats. Number 16, I have Wreck-It Ralph from 2012. One of the films that I had never seen before this year. I can't deny that I got a kick out of Wreck-It Ralph as a fan and player of old school arcade video games. All the stuff with Q*bert in particular really got me. Beyond that, the story of a Donkey Kong stand-in that doesn't like being the bad guy, connecting with a forgotten mascot held down by an evil overlord, is surprisingly touching and well done. Number 15, we have The Godfather Part 2 from 1974. And now for my biggest disappointment of the year. I watched the original for the first time nearly a decade ago at this point and was blown away by it, not knowing going in that Michael Corleone is the titular ascendant godfather rather than his scene-stealing father. The backstory of a villain is perhaps my favorite storytelling trope, and The Godfather does it better than any other story I've ever seen. So imagine my surprise when I found this overlong sequel that utilizes artful flashbacks and other of my favorite techniques to build up the backstory of the original Godfather to be a fantastically made but ultimately pretty dull affair. At this point, Michael has already fallen, so to further document his fall from grace doesn't hit anywhere near as hard, requiring the character to devolve into almost comic villainy that it's almost hard to take seriously by the end. And that just leaves the frankly random flashbacks with Vito to carry and the movie, and they only make up a small portion of the runtime, and at the end of the day are completely unnecessary to the main thrust of the plot outside of a contrast to how the two criminal overlords run their families. So there's no question this is art, and I can understand why the film has its fans, but I am sad to say that I am just not one of them. A real shame, as I went in expecting to be as enraptured as I was with the first. Number 14, I have Fahrenheit 11/9 from 2018, one of my favorite documentaries ever. Fahrenheit 11/9 seeks to answer the question on most Americans' mind when Donald Trump ascended to the presidency, given voice by Michael Moore himself in the opening minutes. How the fuck did this happen? The answers are much more distressing than you expect, and if you haven't been paying attention, come from the worst places imaginable. Moore put the film up for free in the lead up to the 2024 election, the result of which makes this much watched documentary sadly more relevant than ever. At number 13, I have The Cove from 2009. If you aren't seething with rage by the end of Fahrenheit 11/9, may I prescribe the even more distressing The Cove, a documentation of the absolute brutality that still goes on to this day on the coast of Japan with some of the most beloved sea creatures in the world. I don't think a single piece of media has ever distressed me as much as The Cove did, to the point where I actively try not to think about it. But as a journalist, I also have to appreciate the great work that went into this unnecessary spy thriller montages notwithstanding effort to cast a light on one of the most disgusting ongoing atrocities on this earth. Number 12, I have Joker Folie à Deux from 2024, the sequel to the monstrous success of 2019's Joker, one of my personal favorite films of all time. Was never going to be anywhere near as big, probably even if it was played straight. And instead, Todd Phillips and company decided to make a meta art film that pointed its crosshairs squarely at the audience that loved the original for the wrong reasons, leading to many a self report on social media in the wake of its highly publicized and controversial release earlier this year. It's certainly not a film for everyone, but I must say it really stuck with me, and I come away impressed by the bold decision making of the production and the script. Number 11, I have The Silence of the Lambs from 1991. On Thanksgiving Eve, my wife's family convinced me to cross off one of the greatest classics of the 90s with our viewing of The Silence of the Lambs. The film's ability to ratchet up the intensity without resorting to simple jump scares that sink so many horror flicks is laudable, as is the disturbing psychology behind one of the silver screen's all time great villains in Hannibal Lecter. I do think things get a bit less interesting after his great escape two-thirds of the way through, but the harrowing conclusion and final phone call still make for a solid way to end what is an undeniable classic thriller. Number 10, I have Bambi from 1942. Other than Snow White, which I find to be an almost painfully dull affair, I really love much of Disney's earliest work. I've been a longtime advocate of Pinocchio in particular, and I was pleasantly surprised by how touched I was by Bambi, a film I had surely seen in my early youth, but one that did not make a routine appearance in my personal VCR player back in the day. But the art is truly stunning for a film as aged as Bambi is, and the script is also, while simple, surprisingly effective. At number 9, I have Juno from 2007. Well, Juno was a pretty big piece of my awakening with great films and sadly sexual awareness in education, as the film was literally shown to me in health class in my freshman year of high school. Um, I was surprised to learn that Reagan, despite being a big fan of Elliot Page, had never seen it. That was quickly remedied in the closing months of 2024, and there was not a dry eye in the house between the two of us. Juno's script is certainly excellent, but it is the quality and performances of the now all-star cast that sends it from being a great film to one of the best. At number 8, I have The Sound of Music from 1965. I went into The Sound of Music fully expecting to hate it, considering all the almost objectively annoying music from it that I've been exposed to out of context. But going in knowing nothing about the uh, other than that the music that's in it, and certainly knowing nothing regarding the Nazi plot line, I came away incredibly impressed. There's a reason this is a classic, and I've come to realize it has very little to do with its annoying musical numbers. At number 7, I have Do the Right Thing from 1989, arguably Spike Lee's most famous, poignant, and still incredibly relevant work. I feel Do the Right Thing should be required viewing for every American. That isn't to say it's a film every American would enjoy. My wife, seeing it for the first time here, found it painful at times to continue. When the message is this important, not to mention brilliantly directed, it's worth suffering through some overlong Rosie Perez scenes of shouting and cursing. And as a bonus, you'll now fully be able to appreciate the opening lines of Kanye West's Good Morning. At number 6, I have Chinatown from 1974. Put blankly, I think Chinatown is the greatest detective film I've ever seen, and surely I'm not the only one to posit such. Seeing a young Jack Nicholson uncover a truly frightening and infuriating water-based conspiracy, and the disturbingly realistic tyrant pulling the strings behind the scenes is second to none, as is the equally disturbing and realistic ending that, try as you might, you will never be able to forget once you see it for yourself. At number five, I have Casablanca from 1942. It's a tight race between Chinatown and Casablanca, and there's a case to be made I have the order wrong here, but as much as I love the mystery of the former, the unadulterated emotional storytelling of the latter just manages to tug on my heartstrings that much more. Humphrey Bogart's jaded lead is just almost impossible not to relate to and root for, and the run up to the film's dramatic and world famous conclusion is just beautifully done. At number four, I have Citizen Kane from 1941. While I preferred Casablanca in my youth, the psychological drama of Citizen Kane, which definitely uses and popularized the flashback technique, where others like The Godfather Part 2 failed to use them to their full potential, is just, in a word, captivating. While I knew the truth behind Rosebud going in this time, and I'm not even sure the film fully sticks the landing on that, the psychological deep dive into the fall of Charles Foster Kane makes for an all time classic that is almost worthy of the nearly insurmountable praise that has been heaped upon it. At number three, I have Once from 2007. The first time I watched Once in early 2013 as part of this awful film class I was in during my freshman year of college, although it did expose me to many truly excellent films, many of which I clearly rewatched this year, so you can tell I was brushing up. I had recently broken up with my high school girlfriend and was left an absolute wreck by the incredibly close-hitting script of Once, a brilliantly written Irish indie film from director John Carney. While I'm married and in a much better place now, blunting the impact somewhat, my second viewing more than a decade later still had me coming away extremely impressed, particularly by the acting of the virtually unknown leads, both legitimate musicians first and actors second. Frankly, I don't think I've ever seen more realistic acting and dialogue in any other work. The film probably relies a bit too heavily on the music for the taste of some. Many sequences include full renditions of full length songs written by the lead Glenn Hansard. But even so, it's hard to think of a human being coming away from Once without feeling something, and feeling strongly at that. Number two, I have Joker from 2019. No matter how many times I view it, the strength of Joker never seems to wane for me. It was perhaps my most anticipated film of all time leading up to its release, and yet it blew those expectations away completely. And that's coming from somebody that is not a DC fan by any stretch. But the backstory of a villain is my favorite storytelling trope, and other than perhaps Star Wars and obviously The Godfather, I've never seen it done better than with this psychologically rich masterpiece. But at number one, for movies I watched in 2024, I have Soul from 2020. Simply put, the most touching, beautiful, and I think greatest film I've ever seen. I can't fathom calling Soul a children's movie. Indeed, I fear many a child would be bored by this film's muted visuals and script, clearly designed to evoke emotions from parents rather than those experiencing their most formative years. But for anyone older than, say, a teenager, I dare you to watch this film's climax and not come away with at least a little bit of extra wetness behind your eyelids. So that's it for the films I watched in 2024, and all we have left is the books I read this year, which sadly comes in at just four. This is due in large part to the Herculean task that was reading the nearly 1,000 pages of A Clash of Kings out loud to my wife, who was absolutely obsessed with A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones, and whose favorite pastime this year was lying in bed and listening to me recite a tale she already knows like the back of her hand. That said, here are the books I read in 2024, ranked from worst to best. At number four, I have 1001 Video Games You Must Play Before You Die, which had a lot of writers in it, but it was edited by Tony Mott. I mentioned this tome of a book during my recent podcast discussing the games I played in 2024, but a daily experience in the early part of this year was spent reading through the 1001 entries in the book of video games I should play before I die, which is something I think about probably a lot more than I should. That said, I find I'll probably end up skipping a lot of these as the authors relegated way too much list space to some of the simplest games ever made, and I'm not even talking about the arcade classics. Do I really need to play Mercury Meltdown on the PSP, for instance, before I leave this earth over more formative experiences that weren't included on the list, like Pokemon Gold and Silver or Kingdom Hearts 2? These authors would say so, but their justifications for such leave a lot to be desired. At number three, I have The Accommodation by Jim Schultz. This look at the formative years of the Dallas community through a race-tinged lens is fascinating, if a bit overwrought, dense, and outdated today. That said, hearing accounts of how the city leadership and executive class panicked when JFK was shot in the city streets, or the dark history of the construction of Love Field in the middle of a neighborhood, have definitely stuck with me since I finished the book back in February. Definitely a very interesting read for those that live in Dallas or live near, in the shadow of Dallas, as I did when I grew up and still do today. My number two is Sword of Destiny by Andrzej Sapkowski. My reading of the Witcher books to my wife Reagan has been a slow crawl, particularly thanks to the amount of reading I'm already having to do to satisfy her hunger for the writing of George R. R. Martin. But we did manage to get through the second collection of short stories and at least a few chapters of the first actual book, Blood of Elves, earlier this year. I don't think it's unfair to say Sapkowski's work, despite his penchant for amusing dialogue, pales in comparison to Martin's epic. It's still annoyingly unfinished magnum opus, but it still makes for some engaging fare for fantasy fans nonetheless, particularly going forward as Siri comes of age. This collection of short stories certainly outstrips the crap they put together in the Netflix show, that's for sure. And then at number one, unsurprisingly, is A Clash of Kings by George R. R. Martin. As much as I enjoyed my first ever read through of the content that essentially makes up season two of Game of Thrones, and considering there are only three books left, you can see how the writers quickly started running out of content at the show's annual season pace. It's definitely a more uneven tome than its predecessor. It lacks the mystery of Ned Stark's point of view and instead relies more on the politics of King's Landing through the eyes of Tyrion Lannister and the machinations of the war's biggest movers out in the field, as told by Catelyn Stark. I noticed a bit of a dip from season one to season two of the show as well, so I wasn't surprised by this, but I did still notice it. Even so, the quality of Martin's work, even at its lowest point, still outstrips almost everything else in this genre and made for an enjoyable, if at times ponderous, read. So those are the books that I read in 2024. Now we've heard from the music I listened to this year, the movies I watched this year, the books I read this year. The only thing that I want to hit before we sign off today is my I didn't because whenever I recorded my video game focused 2024 podcast, I didn't have time to get my Nintendo wrap up in. They hadn't come out with that yet. So if I can pull it up here, let's take a look at my Nintendo Switch 2024 year in review, which is going to come in somewhere between the results from my PlayStation 1 and the Xbox One. So here we go. I kicked off the year with Nintendo on January 11th, 2024, with the Game Boy Advance player, which is definitely probably where I spent the most time on my Switch this year, which I didn't even wasn't able to do for a majority of it because I started my uh, one only year that I've ever subscribed to the top tier. Basically, there's two tiers on the Nintendo Online, and I subscribed to the top one to play some Game Boy Advance games and some Nintendo 64 games, mostly to play Mario Party with my wife. And I subscribed to that in February 2023, so it was coming to an end, obviously, in the early part of 2024. So I was really trying to get my time in with it before I ran out of time. And so yeah, in January 11th, I started off the year with some Game Boy Advance. I think probably specifically Fire Emblem, which I played this year. But overall, I played 39 games on my Switch and 250, spent 250 hours on it. So actually, a pretty decent chunk of time there. I think on Xbox I was, gosh, I think it was like maybe like 100 hours or so. And then on PlayStation, I was, I think 600 something hours. So, closer to the Xbox side of things, I guess, but still a pretty uh, significant amount of time this year spent on the Switch. My most played games in 2024. Let's go. Okay, they only give me my top three. So my number three was The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, which I spent 32 hours on this year. Started playing it on August 12th, 2023. Still haven't finished it or come even close. My most played time with it this year was in June. Yeah, really love Tears of the Kingdom. Really enjoying it. Obviously, it's taking me way longer to get through this than Breath of the Wild. I kind of talked about this. I think on my podcast with Chase. We were talking about his top 25. I've definitely got to spend some more time with Tears of the Kingdom, and I'm a long way from finishing, but I am loving it. I'm absolutely loving it. So it's just such a beast to get through, and there's been other things that I'm working on, but hopefully this year, man, ideally I'd be able to cross it out this year, but we'll see. Number two most played game this year on Switch was Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, which I spent 39 hours playing. I started that on. So oh, okay. I guess the first time I ever played it was April 7th, 2023. Most I played this year was in March. Yeah, I played that one with Reagan for the first time this year, and it just cracked her top 25 games of all time list, if I recall. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. It's always a good time going through Knights of the Old Republic and introducing it to somebody else. I've played it with various people over the course of my life. Played it with Brett, played it with Sean on the channel. That was what launched Wildfire Gaming. You can go back and see that playthrough. And then, of course, played it with Reagan here. I played it with my brother as well. So it's just a game that I really love and I love sharing with others. So there you go. It's my number two. And then number one, unsurprisingly, was Game Boy Advance Nintendo Switch Online, which I spent 45 hours playing. Started for the first time on February 22nd, 2023, which is about the time I subscribed. And it was most played in, of course, February as I was going up against my deadline before my subscription lapsed. Yeah, pretty much all those hours are the original Fire Emblem. I played through that entire thing the first couple of months of this year and absolutely loved it. And it didn't quite make my top 25 games of all time, but it was close. So very enjoyable experience, and one that I really enjoyed. So here we go. My gaming style, according to Nintendo Switch, is my top genre is action, which is surprising. 29% with action, 23% role playing, 20% adventure, 16% party, 8% simulation, and 4% construction and management, which is interesting. So I played the most in February with 79 hours. And you can see my month to month breakdown here. So in January, I played 41 hours. February, I played 79. March, I played 36. April, I played 20. May, I only played 2. June, I played 27. July, I played 16. August, I played 13. September, I played 2. October, I played 3. November, I played 5. And they didn't even bother recording the December numbers. So there you go. So in January, I played 41 hours. Games, played 7 games, played on 13 days. And the game that I played the most was Nintendo 64, Nintendo Switch Online with 17 hours. That was a lot of Mario Party, I think, going on there. In February, again, with 79 hours played, I played 18 games in February over 23 days. And of course, my most played was Game Boy Advance Online with 31 hours. That was definitely all Fire Emblem. In March, with 36 hours played, I played 7 games across 14 days, and most played was Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic with 17 hours played. In April, with 20 hours played, I played 12 games across 9 days. My most played game that month was Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, which is 4 hours. In May, only played 2 hours, 4 games across 2 days, it says. My most played game was Mario Party Superstars with 1 hour. In June, I had 27 hours played. Only 3 games played that month, but 8 days played. And that was Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney with 16 hours. My wife and I were going through that, which I've talked about already. In July, with 16 hours played, my most played game was Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. I guess I played that twice last year. I played it with my wife, and then I also played it just by myself, which was kind of ridiculous. But yeah, I did it. I played 8 games in July across 10 hours and spent 5 hours in Knights of the Old Republic. In August, with 13 hours played, I played 18 games across 5 days, and my most played game was Terra Nil for 11 hours. I don't think I've really spoken too much about Terra Nil. Um, obviously it should have been on the list of games that I started this year. I don't remember having that on my list. It might have been one that I overlooked, but this is a game that I bought for my wife. It's like a city builder, but you're building up environments instead, and it's like at the end you're actually leaving and you take down all of the buildings that you made and just leave the environment behind because all of the stuff that you build is just going toward the goal of restoring the ecosystem basically of wherever you are. So very unique game and one that really appeals to my wife. So that was a cool experience. Still need to go back and finish that. In September, I only spent 2 hours playing games across 3 games and across 2 days, but my most play was The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom with 1 hour. In October, with 3 hours played, I played 7 games across 4 days. My most played game that month was Jackbox Party Pack 8. Definitely played that with my family. In November, with 5 hours played across 5 games in 2 days, my most played game was Jackbox Party Pack 4 with 1 hour. And then, oh yeah, then we don't have anything for December, so there you go. Here comes the big choice. Pick your favorite game of 2024. I think I voted. Yeah, well, yeah, because technically I booted up To the Moon this year just to see how it compared to the PlayStation version, which is what I actually played it on. So, based on that, I have to vote for To the Moon. And also, it's good for me to get some people to get some respect on To the Moon's name because not too many people probably picked that. So I'll click on that one. So there you go. That's my Nintendo Switch stats for 2024, in case you were curious. And with that, we can finally put 2024 to bed at Controlled Burns and start to get excited for the new year and new possibilities for the show. Thanks for indulging in my look back at the content I engaged with over the course of the year, over the course of these couple podcasts I did. The year end is always my favorite time of year, thanks in part to my interest in doing so, and it has been great to have this new outlet to create something of a time capsule for myself this year. I've got a lot of exciting guests and topics lined up for the new year that I'm really looking forward to getting into, but if you have any topics or suggestions or comments for me, please write into controlledburnes@gmail.com to let me know. Also, if you enjoy the show and want to hear more lists, please subscribe, follow, like, review, wherever you listen to your podcasts. But for now, and until next time, keep it warm.